Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Today I will be the host for this event. Let me first of all welcome Dr. Nfamara Dampha to this event, and as well as the participants to join us here for this discussion on the PhD dissertation. First of all, allow me to congratulate Dr. Nfamara Dampha for completing this dissertation and having the willingness to share it with public and the policymakers to have a discussion to inform policies and decisions for the Gambia. And I will give you a brief introduction of myself. I am Ismaila Jajusi. I work with the National Population Commission Secretariat. Is under the Office of the Vice President. I've been working here for over 8 years. And for my education, I have a master's in demography from Stockholm University and a bachelor's in economics from the University of the Gambia, as well as a postgraduate diploma in population and policy analysis from the University of Northwest University from South Africa. I will give a brief introduction of Dr. Nfamara Dampha, who is the author of this dissertation. Dr. Nfamara is a Kian Junior native, now based in Minnesota, United States. Dr. Dampha is a lead scientist and program director for the National Capital Project at the University of Minnesota, USA. He also serves as the World Bank Group's senior climate change consultant. Dr. Dampha was at one time the Director of Administration and Human Resources at the National Disaster Management Agency, Gambia. He's also the founding executive director for Household Disaster Resilience Project, the Gambia Help. Gambia, a registered Gambian nonprofit, and the current president of the Gambia Association in Minnesota. Dr. Dampha brings over 13 years of professional, academic, and leadership experience. His specific research and professional work focuses on the intersection of climate change adaptation, disaster risk analysis, natural capital accounting, ecosystem service modeling, forced displacement, and international sustainable development. Dr. Dampha has a successful track record of interdependent and interdisciplinary research and multi-stakeholder engagement in strengthening climate-resilient communities, especially in Africa, local, national, and international decision makers, including World Bank, UNHCR, local nonprofits, and government agencies in the Gambia, have used his peer review publications, policy briefs, and operational relevant reports. So that is the introduction for Dr. Nfamara Dampha. Now I will invite Dr. Dampha to do his presentation. Yes, Doctor, you are welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jajusi, for that very kind introduction. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, you are audible enough.
All right, thank you. So today we're going to extend the discussion to the final chapter of my dissertation, which focuses on coastal ecosystem service assessment valuation. I will try as much as possible to break these concepts in a way that the audience can understand, because ecosystem science and ecosystem policy, it's not very straightforward because of the complexities around that. Now, today we will talk about a specific study area, which is the Senegambia beach area. This is classified as the 6th coastal zone, or coastal zone cell 6 in the Gambia. You know, you all know that the Gambia's coastline is divided into different cells, and each cell has its own vulnerability conditions and its own dynamics. The study focuses on, if you go to this next slide, sometimes I'm tempted not to use slides. I hope they are relevant. But So try to follow the discussion as you move through slides. Otherwise, you can put the slides down. I think it might be, maybe we'll be fine. So we are looking at um, understanding Gambians' willingness to pay for what we call improved coastal protection against climate change impacts, which includes rising sea levels and coastal erosion. So this is really important. Now let's track back a little bit. We know from previous studies, a lot of studies done in the Gambia, climate vulnerability studies, that the Gambia's coastline is very fragile and vulnerable to climate change impacts. Again, rising sea levels, coastal erosion. Many of you will know that the Gambia's sandy beach areas have been significantly eroded due to these phenomena or these hazards that I've mentioned, coastal erosion. Now, these studies identify the need for the government of the Gambia to take the right action, interventions to address the issue of coastal erosion. To do that, government need to come up with a project. And this study came at a time when government designed a project that aims to provide some coastal protection mechanisms to address the crisis. And the project was costed to be about 13 million US dollars to do this specific intervention along the Senegambia coastline. And the specifics of the intervention, you can go to Coates and Mani study, but the idea is to do what we call revetments. So you're going to have these rocks between the beach, between the coastline, the shoreline, and the sort of the upper side of the shorelines, so that you try to minimize as much as possible the erosion effect that occurs as a result of rising sea level. So that context is important. What was done? What was the status of the conditions at the time, and what was the specific government action to be taken? Now, what I try to do is to say this project is costly, and it means that government has to pay about $13 million to do that. But do we understand what the value of the Gambia's coastline means for Gambians? In other words, if this money is coming from taxpayers' funds, are Gambians stating their willingness to pay to protect the coastline? That is to, in essence, understand the value proposition that folks have in terms of what coastal protection in itself means in Gambia's context. The way to do that, because we know the coastline of the Gambia is significantly important for a number of reasons. Tourism is a big one. If you look at that trend over time, the arrivals of tourists in the Gambia the past 3 or 4 decades have been significantly increasing. And mainly they are coming for recreational purposes. So we need to understand, is it worth for the government of the Gambia to protect its coastline so that this continuous service that the coastline provides, not just to international tourists, but even local tourists? And local tourists here, we're talking about all of us who like to be on the beach side on Sunday evening to enjoy all of the services that nature offers. And in a more technical term, we call this ecosystem services. And what does that mean? The coastline itself is an ecosystem. It provides services. And it provides services that, in the Gambia's context, we're not paying a dime to enjoy those services. In some contexts, to access a recreational site, you have to pay for it. But in our context, well, as long as you can travel to the location, you can benefit from these coastal recreational services. And those mean the swimming that we all do on the beach side, right? The picnicking, right? And then the walking around the beach, the sports, and all the other kinds of activities that folks do when they go to this site. So it's important that if you go to the next slide, we ask the question, if this is such an important issue for the government of the Gambia, for local tourism purposes, international tourism reasons, can we assess people's willingness to pay to enhance the improvement or the restoration of the site and prevent current and future inundations from coastal climate vulnerability hazards. For example, we're talking about rising sea levels again and coastal erosion. And if we know people are willing to pay, we can use a methodology that help us to do that assessment. But the same methodology help us to ascertain the aggregate willingness to pay. That's what we call the welfare value, right? The welfare value of people's willingness to pay for that protection to occur. Now, if you go to the next slide, theoretically speaking, we can link natural capital. When we say natural capital, we mean nature's gifts, everything that nature provides. The beautiful coastline, of course, right? It's all natural. You know, the biodiversity there, okay? The forest ecosystems around. These are all natural resources. Economists would like to call it capital, but it's basically assets. These are assets. These assets provide services, and those services, we call them what? Ecosystem services. And to break down the concept nowadays, we will call it nature's contribution to improving human well-being. Sometimes you'll hear that, right? And sometimes you will hear terms like nature-based solutions. So those are solutions, nature-based solutions are solutions that enhances the management, the restoration, the protection of natural resources to deliver the services that they do for free of charge. Nature doesn't ask for a check, right, to provide those services. And what are those services? They're categorized into three. One is provisioning services. We know we get certain provisions from nature in terms of food, medicine, and like, you name them, fiber and all that stuff. But there are also other services we call regulating services. Nature in itself regulates itself. Nature takes care of itself if human intervention does not significantly contribute to that natural process for nature to take care of itself. What do I mean? When there is a threshold at which nature is able to deal with the pollution that comes into it. If that threshold is gone beyond certain level, nature is not able to take care of it. Means we've messed up with nature, and it is our responsibility to fix it. So nature regulates. One example of nature's regulation of itself is what we call through carbon sequestration. We all know from basic science, go back to grade 1 or grade 2. What? Trees, they release oxygen and then they sequester or take in carbon dioxide. The humans, we're the ones releasing that carbon dioxide that trees get. But it's not just us and trees, it's also carbon dioxide coming from other economic activities that take place in the economy. So what trees do is actually basically to sequester all of that excess carbon in the atmosphere and store it for a very long time. Okay? If we cut down those trees decay, what happens? The carbon is released back into the atmosphere. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So that's why coming up with nature-based solutions in the coastline area, it will be in the form of mangrove restoration. They are excellent in storing carbon. And mangroves also do not only store carbon, but they also minimize the potential of the shoreline to be eroded. They reduce the risk of coastal erosion, basically. So those are some of the regulating services that nature offers. It also offers, for example, water purification is a great example that comes out of nature, right? But in this specific case, there is also the third category, which is recreational and cultural ecosystem services. We recreate, we enjoy the serenic beauty of the coastline. Those are services that we don't pay for, and that's coming directly from nature, whether it's picnicking or swimming. All these things are things that we get through our direct interaction with natural resources and natural capital. So if you look at those three categories, how do we understand and how do we value the recreational services that we get from Senegambia beach area? The question is, we need to come up with natural resource economic tools. And some of those tools are many, but today I will talk about a specific one that I use in this study called contingent valuation. Now, contingent valuation is a stated preference method. What it does is that you are asking your respondents to put themselves in a scenario-based situation, giving them a baseline and giving them an improvement scenario to say, to move from the baseline, this current vulnerability scenario, to come to this improved scenario, we need to do something. So that's the intervention. Remember that the first stage I've talked about what? The project that was meant to address the challenge that the Senegambia beach area is facing. So that's the scenario we bring to the people. And based on the project description and the project activities, we look at the advantages of having that project there, but also their project comes with some drawbacks. Because, for example, if you have rocks in front of the beach area that is blocking direct access to the water, that's a little bit inconvenient for some people. So, question you want to ask: are Gambians really interested and willing to pay for such a project, considering the advantages of the project? Is going to slow down coastal inundation, beach erosion will be slowed, but then direct access is limited somehow. So you look at these two components of the benefits of the project and drawdowns of the project. So contingent evaluation is a remarkable, heavily used natural resource economics tool that help us to assess what we call known market goods and services. Because if you want to look at market goods and services, what do? We go directly into the market. We have the data for that. But for non-market goods and services, recreation, we don't have data for it in the Gambia. There are different ways you can get the data, but one way is to collect the data directly from the people who interact in that space. And this is why the study was needed to do a contingent evaluation. Now, if you go to the next slide, it's still theoretical to deconstruct the concept a little bit, right? If you look at the beach, as I said, it has what we call use values and non-use values. Those use values, you can categorize them in two again. You have the actual use of it, and then you have the optional use. The optional use is to know that, well, it's good to know that the Senegambia beach exists, is out there, and if I want to use it in the future, I have the option to go and, enjoy the services that it offers. But the actual use is actually the benefit you derived from going to the Senegambia beach. And those could be direct, it could also be indirect. But if you look at it in detail, the direct means that what is the satisfaction that you gain if you interact in that space? Some of the indirect would be like, you can think of the fact that I am not the one potentially to use this area, but that doesn't mean that I do not care about its protection, because my grandkids, my kids may be interested in using the space. So you don't make the value judgment based on the fact that it's about you. That's not how we make decisions. We make decisions because we think about our kids, we think about our grandkids, we think about, what if tomorrow I want to use it? The option still remains for you to use it. So those are some of the things that I want to bring out. Now, if you go next slide, you realize that the data collection in itself was a robust approach. And then it started off with online interaction with what I call the research assistants that supported the study. About 40 undergraduate students at the University of the Gambia were involved in this exercise, collecting the data. And if you go to the next slide, you realize that we paid a lot of attention to the survey design. The survey design ensures the validity of contingent evaluation. Because remember, in contingent evaluation, when we talk about validity, what do we mean? We mean that we're trying to prevent bias, whether it's the interviewer bias or respondents bias. So the way you construct the design of the survey matters a lot. And in this case, specifically, the contingent evaluation approach we use is referred to as willingness to pay. There are two approaches. You could either do willingness to pay or you do willingness to accept what? Compensation. What are the differences? Willingness to pay means that there is already a major problem and that problem needs to be addressed, and the property rights of that problem is a common resource. What do I mean by that? That means that the Senegambia beach area doesn't necessarily belong to anybody. It belongs to the entire population. So we must talk to each other, persuade each other, or come up with regulations, public policy regulations that help to address the challenge. So we have to do a willingness to pay approach. The other way is to accept compensation, which is to say that in the case of climate, if there is a climate regulation and agreement at the global level somehow that says that for all coastlines around the world that have been severely degraded, inundated because of climate change, there is a climate funding mechanism that will help to address that problem. Because now the problem is external. Somebody causes the problem, and what it means that for us to address that problem, it means that we need to accept compensation. And there is a negotiation there to say, well, we will accept that compensation, but not that compensation. Let's do a survey to see how much people are willing to accept. So I'm not going to go into the details of the methods, but the other aspects to highlight related to the methods is what type of payment method do you use? There are different ways to do the payment method. The payment method could be cash, but it could also be labor. In some cases, the improvement scenario could mean that people need to participate and do more, maybe some tree planting to prevent coastal erosion, with the nature-based solutions that I've talked about, like with mangrove restoration. So it doesn't always mean that people have to pay money to ascertain their willingness to pay or to ascertain that they value or care about this situation. So you could also assess it based on the label that people are willing to provide, which is very useful in developing world context, because you all know that in the Gambia, for example, we've done many projects, especially in the villages, where we're not paying, but we are providing a lot of free labor to do that project or those projects. And then the willingness, the payment vehicle here is contingent donation. What does that mean? The contingent donation says that it has to be a voluntary payment mechanism. The other way to do it is to say it is going to be what? Involuntary. It's going to be based on a law, a taxation. The Gambia government could introduce a tax that says for all Gambians or for anybody who wants to access the Senegambia beach area, they must pay this much amount of money. It could be a fee. It could also be a direct tax that is paid directly through your employer. So the validity again is maximizing your validity, improving your validity is to minimize your bias. And to minimize bias in our study, we look at the design. There was expert review of the design of the survey. There was also visual aids that were presented to the respondents so that the respondents can understand exactly what are we talking about. Because again, this is a little bit technical and it's not very common. This type of studies are not common in the Gambia and very common in a lot of many places. Only one study, when the time I was doing this about 3-4 years ago, only one study applied contingent valuation in the Gambia, and that was in 1993 in CRR. So the other improvement that went into the design was to do a pretest, and the pretest was necessary again to check consistency and to make sure that the interviewers are understanding the process, they are asking the right questions, and to bring out any technical challenges or any communication challenges that they are facing. So we had to do a pretest, and all of this was also built up on a demo of the protest of the pretest. The demo was essentially amongst ourselves as interviewers. So we demonstrated some would become interviewers and others are respondents, and then I was watching as they were interviewing each other. Now, because we don't have much time, I'm just going to go directly into the results. So if you look at the visual aids that I was telling you about, that slide shows the extent to which the coastline has been degraded in the Gambia. Some parts of the coastline used to be 150 meters of beach area. Now, in some areas, is less than 20 meters, about 16 meters in some of the areas. So this is very severe. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is the improvement scenario I was talking about. Again, you see the convenience of having this, but also the inconvenience of this kind of project. Because for someone to now access the water, they have to walk on those rocks or whatever to get there. But what the rocks provide is to minimize that inundation or that erosion of the sand on the other side. So that's critical. This is why I said you have to look at the design of the intervention, the benefits of that design, and the drawbacks of that design. And we go to the next slide. This scenario itself says to Gambians and to our respondents, we basically have this problem, and we know that government cannot do it all. Now, government has a responsibility, but we know government doesn't have the funds to fix all these problems. Now, the public will be required to provide 40% of the project cost, and that we can assure the respondents that the cost, the money collected will be properly utilized for the purpose for which it was collected, that is to do the project. And again, we break down what the project is going to do on the beach side, and what are the advantages of having that project, and what are the disadvantages of having of a project like that. And then we ask the question, based on that scenario, how much are they willing to pay? And this is a one-time donation from the respondents. So there was whether they're willing to pay $50 is $100 is 300 and 500. So we systematically ask this question to a number of respondents that we talked to. Now we go to the next slide. That is again to bring the context of some of the videos I have made before visiting the Gambia, for the interviewers to kind of take a look at those videos, understand what we're trying to do. And then this was the training and the demonstration that I was trying to talk about, which was also done prior to the study. And then if you go to the next slide, you see that there was an expert discussion with the Coastal Management Working Group at the NEA. These are government experts who really pay attention to coastal vulnerability issues, coastal interventions. So this was also very critical too. And then we had a pre-test, which I've already talked about. Those are just to show you some visuals. If you go to the next slide, and then the following slide, you realize that there was also a community sensitization that we've done, such that the people know and expect what we're doing. The media was there. We went to radio stations, talk about the survey, what we're trying to do, and then make sure that, in fact, it was also covered in the news. So these were all important, again, to improve that validity that I talk about, and just to make sure that people understand why we are on the beach and what are we doing. These are some pictures of interviews that were done, field editing of the survey. So again, very grateful to a lot of Gambians, many of them probably watching this, that were involved in this research. So it's a very collaborative research. And then, so let's talk about the results. I'm going to talk about the results in a few minutes. What were the results? Overall, we found that 90% of Gambians have expressed affirmative or positive willingness to pay for this project. And what was interesting, see, sometimes when we make decisions based on international versus national interest, the tourist community that we interview, if you look at the numbers, the aggregate numbers, they have slightly less willingness to pay than Gambians. That's interesting. Because why is that so? Because the tourists know that if the Gambia does not take care of its own beach areas, they have alternative options. There are many other places, destinations that they can visit. So they will go. So they don't really care. So that's why it's important that we think about How do we make decisions, and what the impact of those decisions are? Now, that slide is so detailed, is the descriptive statistics of the respondents that we talked to, their demographic information, socioeconomic information, and also information related to their visitation. And if you go to the next slide, we look at the activities that folks do when they visit this site. And most people, of course, not surprising, of course, walk and trek. They said they go to the beach just to walk around and trek around and all that stuff. The second highest was that of swimming. So a number of people said they visit the beach area to go swim. The next was more of like socializing with others and networking and stuff like that. And a number of people also talk about picnicking and sports. So those are some of the major activities that people are excited about, motivated when they make their mind to visit the beach area. Of course, this is also went into, we did some quantitative analysis, and that quantitative analysis is to use regression methods. And if you go to the next slide, we use probit regression and compare our results to logistic regression. And those results are interesting. Of course, the covariates would be all of the data points that I've talked about, demographic and socioeconomic variables, right? Institutional responsibility. And this is based on opinions of the respondents, recreational activities. And the findings, if you go up further into the few more slides, the findings are interesting. So all else constant, on average, respondents stated that they are 18% more likely to pay for coastal protection if they identify themselves as what? Part-time employees. This is a policy question. Do you know why? Because the part-time employees are the seasonal workers that are on the beach. These are the people that get um, their income seasonally from tourism. So they have higher willingness to pay than others. And of course, they are less, but still significant, about 11% more willing to pay if they identify themselves as what? Full-time employees. So that's also very critical, because we have to look at the liquidity issue. To what extent do they have the resources to pay? I see that we are now on the slide. Let's go to the aggregate welfare value slide just to summarize the main findings in terms of aggregate numbers. So what is aggregate value to pay? Of course, we cannot talk to all Gambians. That's not studies. That's not how studies are done. We have to talk to a representative sample of the Gambia. And our survey was more representative of the urban population. So that's why our aggregation mainly focuses on the urban Gambian population. So in terms of what is that aggregate, we're looking at the total urban population in the Gambia. These are the people that have direct or almost have more interest or more likely to visit the Senegambia beach area. So what happens? If we look at the estimated willingness to pay, which was about $500, now you now multiply your estimated average willingness to pay with the total urban population. So that gave us what? About in dollars, that is about 12.5 million US dollars. So that is the urban aggregate welfare value that you could say the Senegambia beach area offers, um, um, based on this specific intervention. So that's about, in dollars, that's 576,450,000. Now, some will argue, but that is not representative of the entire country. Of course, it is not. Of course, the beach has some trickle down benefits for the rural population. It is not true to say that even though the rural people don't access the Senegambia beach, they have zero interest and zero willingness to pay. That's absolutely not right. So what we did, we took a conservative approach to say, suppose the rural population has the lowest willingness to pay because of the proximity challenge, right? They cannot access, they don't go to the beach all the time. But of course, they benefit from services and connection that the beach has with the rural populace. So then we gave them an average willingness estimated value of $50. Suppose all people in the rural area said, we're willing to pay about just $50, not dollars, $50 to improve the Senegambia beach conditions. So that gives you about 445,000 US dollars. The tourist willingness to pay is a little bit, again, the tourist population is based on the tourist population, which the last statistics that we found was about 142,000. So then the aggregate welfare value that comes from the tourist sector, or at least international tourists, is about 1.5 million. So if you put all those numbers together, what do you see? You have 14.5 million US dollars. That is the total aggregate national value for that specific project to enhance coastal conditions in Senegambia. Now, what we have to do, if you go to the final slide, the next slide there, we now have to compare. That's the cost benefit analysis slide. Now we have to do a cost benefit analysis. Remember at the beginning, I said the cost of the project was 13 million US dollars. Now we have Gambians already saying they can pay up to more than that amount. In fact, about 1.5 million more. So remember, even the scenario told Gambians that scenario one said to Gambians, you are only supposed to pay about 40% of the project. But based on this study, we can conclude evidently that Gambians have the willingness to cover, entirely pay for the total cost of the project if the right policy mechanisms are put in place. So we don't really need international support for that project to be implemented. That's the fact. And if that money is coming from public funds, is coming from our national budget, is justifiable. This study can justify to the National Assembly or whoever and said, I know we are out of time, but we have evidence. We have evidence to publicly use these funds for the benefit of public services. So in conclusion, that is basically what the findings state, that of course, based on our positive willingness to pay, that gives us a positive net present value, we can conclude that that beach improvement project is socially desirable because of why the aggregate welfare value estimate overweighs the total cost of the project. That's what contingent valuation studies help you to assess. That's what cost benefit analysis help to inform policy decision making. That was longer than I thought, but I'm going to stop there. We have 20 minutes for questions. You can put the slides down. Jajusi, I apologize for more time than allocated.
That is fine. Thank you very much, Dr. Nfamara, for that brilliant presentation and on this comprehensive research on willingness to pay. Though I am not very versed in this approach that you have used in your study, but demography and climate issues are interdisciplinary areas that can, they are interlinked. Anyway, and let me thank you again. And you have gone through this scientific process to, come up with these findings that can inform a project that you are even proposing here for Gambians to have, at least for everybody to take some kind of responsibility. I want to ask about this willingness to pay. Did you have any possibility to have in your study to include institutions within the coastal area, like the hotels, the craft markets, and other people who do commercial activities within the coastal area at Senegambia, to see how these people can, because if I understand very well, it seems the interview was done to interview individuals that visited the beach or maybe residential areas to ask them some of these questions. Yeah, I don't know whether that has been brought in, the issue of institutions or the commercial activities taking place on the coastal area.
That's a great question, really important, because what are we trying to establish? We're trying to establish interest in restoration. the general approach for the survey was non-discriminatory. So we don't classify people based on, let's say, they are CEOs or they are whatever, whatever. But we do have two sides. We have the on the beach interviews and we have the off the beach interviews. Now, because the surveys are also voluntary by design, we do not like target a specific individual or a specific organization to respond to the survey. What
Yes.
we did was to randomly, it's a random selection of Gambians. If a CEO was found on the beach that evening and is willing to talk to our interviewers, he will be interviewed. If a business guy is found there, he will be interviewed, things like that. And the same method is applied off the beach areas. Now, of course, there are people who will accept to be interviewed and there are others that will not.
Yeah.
But you're right. What we're not interested in is institutional willingness to pay. We're interested in public willingness to pay. These are two separate things, right? If
Yes.
we're interested in the private sector's willingness to pay, you could do a separate study, which I will encourage whoever wants to apply this method. You could probably do private sector's willingness to pay, and even maybe be more targeted, and focus on the hotels and the businesses that will be the first victims of any uh, um, climate related challenges that's happening in this area. So you could do that, but we didn't do that. We want to understand from a
Perception.
public perception point of view, not directly targeting government or businesses, corporate, or others. But relevant, important point to think about, and separate study to be done.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. And also, maybe I can remind the public if people on the platform have any question to ask, they can send in their comments. Then later, I will read the questions to Dr. Nfamara to respond to the question. And secondly, you came up with very interesting findings out of this study, if it had to happen. I want to ask maybe if this project has to be implemented in the Gambia, how do you think, like you said, the payment method could be both cash, either cash or labor? Um,
Yeah,
what approach should be taken in order to make sure that people really pay this, the tax, I don't know, the tax that will be related to using the coastal side. I don't know if you can give us this
yeah,
widen our, you know,
yeah,
mind about that. Yeah.
yeah. It's a great question again. The payment method we use in this study was cash, and the vehicle we call it vehicle, whatever. It's just a technical term for continued valuation, and the vehicle was donation. Now, the reason why we use donation is to establish voluntary payment and not to condition people to pay. Because if you use tax, that's one of the criticisms about using taxation. If you use tax, you tell people that the government is about to introduce a tax that everybody has to pay to do this project. Will you be willing to make such a payment? And you have to also think about the political and institutional context of the time of your study. We did this shortly after the Jamia administration.
Yeah.
There were a lot of expectations from the public. Now, coming up with a study that was backed by the Ministry of Environment, directly under the National Environment Agency, because again, NEA endorsed the study, so NEA was in the field with us. Now, that establishes legitimacy, meaning that this is not just any type of study, because government officials are backing this. So it could mean that people can protest to say, hell no, we're not paying any tax to use
Okay.
our beach area,
Yeah.
because they are not thinking about the value of the area. They're thinking about a reaction to an institutional policy, especially after such a repressive rule that people have been going through. People had like a lot of expectation when the Barrow administration just started. So that's the reason why we did not do taxes or taxation as a payment vehicle. We decided to do voluntary payment. But your question is now, let's go into reality. In reality, how can we collect this money?
Exactly.
That's the question, right? So the
Yeah.
way we can collect the money is that if you establish what we can call user fees, the user fee that the study established is about $41, $41 per person per visit. We recommend that if you come up with $41 each person per visit, Gambians will be willing to pay that.
Per year. Right.
Per visit, $41 per visitor. So if you go to the beach side, you pay $41. The reason, so how did we get to that $41? Of course, it's based on the results, but also we did a comparison. The comparison was to do what we call reveal preference method, travel cost. We look at how much people pay to travel from all the way from Brikama and some of the neighboring communities to get to the Senegambia destination. The travel cost, if I look at the numbers here, I think I have it in my numbers. The travel cost that we found ranges depending on where you're coming from, because of course the fares are higher from Brikama than from Kersering. But the travel cost is between $1,440 to $3,600 per year. And this is assuming that the average visitation rate among our respondents was around 1 visit per month. So people said to us that we at least we visit the beach area at least once every month on average. Again, on average. So if on average each Gambian goes to the Senegambia beach once a month, and for that visit you ask them to pay 41 Gambian dollars, we can raise a lot of revenue to protect the site and even improve it to a condition that will be more conducive for visitation. So in essence, what I'm saying is that if you look at it, people pay anywhere between 1,000, right? 1,000 to 1,400 to $3,600 per year.
Yeah.
So divide any of those numbers by 12, you realize that how much they pay to travel is even more, way more than how much the study recommends that they should pay as a fee.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, again, is to do taxes and see how people react to taxes, because that's how governments raise revenue. Yeah. But it has to be clear that this money must be used for the purpose for which it was meant to, and that is to improve the condition of the coastline.
Exactly.
Because I think it's not realistic to always think about how grants from international institutions will help to address all of the challenges we're facing in the Gambia. No, $41 is a lot, but if all of us pay $41 every visit to Senegambia,
yeah,
and there is an institution that's not corrupted to collect that money and use that money to improve the conditions of the beach area, it's going to be remarkable. It's going to be a lot of money.
That's right. Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Dampha. Question. That has to do with results. Like you provided some literatures for the variable on age. You found out that negative relationship between age and WTP. And you found out that younger people are willing to pay less than the adult people. Yeah, and you provided some explanation why that have been the case, like the issue of unemployment. Like we all know, that is a very significant explanation why that could have turned negative for the case of Gambia. Unlike other countries, this is used to be negative according to other studies outside the Gambia. Yeah. Do you have maybe do you think there is any other factor, maybe that could also be significant enough um, to be responsible for the age variable to be negative? I was thinking, trying to to make a critical thinking about that. Not, maybe it might not necessarily be only unemployment situation. Unemployment definitely is really very high among the youth, young people. But the age category you use for older people is age 45 and above.
Mm.
Yeah. So do you
So
have any other explanation
yeah,
to that, maybe apart from unemployment?
you know, I'm very happy that you asked this question. It also demonstrated you read the chapter.
Yeah.
So that's impressive. So yes, so we found a negative relationship between age and willingness to pay. That the younger Gambian population, below 25, express less willingness to pay compared to the elderly. The reason you've said it is true. One of the reasons is the correlation between that willingness to pay with employment. Remember that the findings on employment and willingness to pay was that those that are employed have more willingness to pay than the unemployed, right? Right, the authorities that are, but also, even interestingly, employment in itself has some dynamics, right? Because we found that part-time employees are, in fact, more willing to pay more, like they're willing to pay more than the full-time employees. And this is because of seasonal workers that utilize and get their direct earning and income from the beach area through tourism, right? A lot of our respondents were seasonal workers. Now, what could be other reasons why young people are willing to pay less? Could it be young people are less aware of, like, the value of having such a coastline? Could it be the fact that young people are protesting to say that, hell no, not me, government must be the one to take care of this, this is not my responsibility, this is a common public space, it is government's responsibility to fix it? Young people, sometimes we become like very passionate and we protest about a lot of things, right? Or could it be the fact that I think there is interest, because I mean, if you look at it, look at the data and the statistics, a lot of young people visit Senegambia for recreational purposes. But the fact that they are visiting does not translate to the fact that they want to pay more compared to the elderly. But also, if you think about why we also have to look at it from the other side. Why are the elderly willing to pay more? Maybe the elderly are more established financially, maybe, right? Also, the elderly, remember, they use it for other reasons, cultural reasons, religious reasons. If you go around these coastal communities, you see a lot of elderly people in the morning with their tasbihs going around the area, enjoying the quiet and the serenic nature of these sites. Maybe the elderly is also thinking about sustainability, right? They are thinking about, oh, it is our responsibility to protect this area. Maybe our kids and our grandkids will need these sites and stuff like that. So normally, elderly people are more mature in terms of how they think than the
Yeah.
younger.
Yeah.
So they may bring in a lot of variables in determining and deciding why they were willing to pay more. But yeah, that was a major surprise. It was a surprise to me that, well, finances will tell you that, well, maybe it's not a major surprise. So this is why I said in my recommendation that sometimes willingness to pay, especially through cash payment methods, may not necessarily translate into the desire and the willingness or the value that people have for that area. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's a liquidity constraint issue. Like, people don't have money, so you're asking them to pay money. They will definitely tell you, I don't have money.
Yeah.
But we try to avoid that in the design of the survey so that they don't think that money is a constraint. What we try to say is willingness to pay, not ability to pay. So be careful when you're doing contingent valuation. You don't say, do you have the ability to pay? It's a different question than when you say, do you have the willingness to pay? Willingness is a desire. Ability is a different question.
Yeah.
The statistical analysis will now tell us whether the ability is there or not. Those are two different things. So we try to avoid and control for that in the design of the survey, but it may have a contributing factor just because of interpretation and understanding.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Famara. I think we don't have much time to have this discussion, to continue with this discussion, but I still have other questions that are maybe related to the chapter 3, because I was preparing myself for both chapter 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you from that study too, you came up with very interesting findings in both the descriptive and the regression analysis using the probit and the logistic, and comparing this with the OLS regression. I found out some very interesting findings from this one too, from chapter 3. Where you provided some a graph that provide an overview of like the grassland, bush, grassland or bush or settlement or development. How much of the proportion of the land size that they have occupied for the Gambia, and I come to find out that grassland has the highest proportion, then followed by the bare soil. Then you have the planted and cultivated follows around 17%, wetland mangrove around 16%. Then you have settlement and development, which is around 12%, and forested is just around 6%. Yeah, this was one of the findings in the background of your study. Interesting, and that shows that. And there is also a map that gives a description of the locations of forests across the country, right? Categorizing them into good, fairly good, poor, and very poor. And the study found out that most of the forests, are located in the West Coast region.
Yep.
So I tend to ask myself this question: why? What really? What really went wrong somewhere? Because I was thinking, given the population size in the provinces, for example, other regions, LRR, NBR, URR, they have a very vast land in those areas. So I was expecting that we should be having
more forests.
More forests in those locations compared to West Coast, where we have a lot of migration being taking place and a lot of deforestation is being taken. What do you think could have been the reason for having this?
So this is again, I'm impressed. You read quite well extensively this other chapter. Yes. So the travel. The answer is just travel. Travel. Take a road trip and go through the North Bank. Travel the North Bank. You just see bare ground, no forest, no trees. North Bank, no trees. Right. Even before you look at it from the satellite data. So what I did was to look at satellite data, and that gives me information about what is where, right? So if you go to CRR, a lot of grassland area, CRR, even some parts of North Bank, grassland, LRR, grassland. LRR has some percentage of forest, especially around the Kiang West area, Kiang West National Park, for example. But look at the Gambia's community forest or protected forest areas. Most of them are in the West Coast region. You're talking about Nyambai Forest, you're talking about all these other locations. They are all mapped there. They are all in West Coast. Now, what's happening is that, in fact, West Coast has lost, I don't have the number right in front of me, but a significant portion of its forest cover, I think it's about 20-something thousand hectares, if I remember, of the forest cover in West Coast because of what? Urban expansion. So you are right. The fact that, yes, West Coast still has more of the forest cover intact, but this is forest at high risk. Not just risk of climate change, but also risk of what? Urban expansion, real estate development. Most people just go and then they cut down the whole trees in the newly purchased empty plots of land. They start building. So it's continuous real estate expansion. And unfortunately, we're doing real estate expansion without factoring in nature-based designs. Because really, I mean, come here. In the United States, for example, people love trees. You have your house, you have trees surrounding your house everywhere. You know, you have trees. On the streets, you have trees. But in
Mhm.
Gambia, you buy an empty plot of land, has all these nice trees. The first thing you think about, get that individual to come and clear everything, cut
Yeah,
down all the trees,
yeah,
not even realizing that those trees are windbreakers. Those trees can prevent and protect your own roofs.
yeah.
But that's not how we think. We just want to cut. We cut down everything, and that's sadly that is what is happening in the West Coast region. So the policy question is that
Mhm.
the government must protect the remaining forest cover in the West Coast region, because if that doesn't happen, it will lead to what I call an ecological and a biodiversity disaster in the Gambia. The
Yeah,
remaining biodiversity in the Gambia still resides in that small West Coast region.
exactly. In fact,
If
I have
if
a follow-up question to that. In fact,
yeah, so go for it.
about
Yeah.
the remaining forest cover we have in the West Coast region. Um, what are some of the smart or innovative strategies maybe the Gambia should implement? Maybe taking the country that where you did your study from as
Yeah.
an example to learn best practices from there. What are some of the innovative ways that we could have employed in the Gambia to ensure that we have more forests in the West Coast, or we regain the lost forest in the West Coast region? What innovative strategies that you think we could
I've talked about a number of strategies in chapter 3, and
examine?
then one of them is protected areas. We
Yeah.
have to come up with legislation that protects the remaining forest cover. This is a protected area. There's a sign there that says the protected area, and it's co-managed. Protected area co-managed between government and the community. We
Mhm.
don't want a top-down approach. We don't want the government to say Nyambai Forest is now protected. Communities cannot even enter there. No, we want to have a community-based structure around, including all of the communities that benefit or have access to Nyambai Forest, to come up with a design that helps to implement that protection status. And what I mean by the design is that, you don't just protect the forest and prevent interaction of people into that forest, because forests provide, remember I said, a number of services. Some go there not just to cut down the trees, but they go there to get some traditional herbs or medicines.
Yeah. Or
So you
fruits.
don't want to your fruits, provisional service. You don't want to close it, but you want to have it managed, co-managed with the communities in such a way that degradation and timber extraction is significantly reduced. That's one
Mhm.
strategy. The other strategy is to promote what
Mhm.
I call urban agriculture. For some of the land areas, I've mapped this in chapter 3, where government could say this area is reserved for urban agricultural production, which means that whoever buys that piece of land, you cannot put built infrastructure there. You can't put houses there. You can only do farming there, urban agriculture.
Yeah.
This will contribute significantly to the food basket of the country. It will create employment, and then it will help with the flood risk mitigation issue that we are all interested in. Because if you have urban forest and urban agricultural spaces, what do? They're nature-based, landscapes. And
Mhm.
what they do is that they try to sequester not just the carbon, but they also help with the infiltration process of that excess water on top to infiltrate and percolate. It doesn't only just percolate, but it percolates to recharge the groundwater aquifers. So now we're not just looking at the benefit from food security, but we are looking at the water resources management issue there, right? To recharge the aquifers, because what's happening if all of the excess water is coming, the aquifers are not recharged because they cannot be recharged through impervious surfaces. What do I mean? If you put concrete everywhere, the aquifers underground are not recharging because that excess water is now running very quickly.
Yeah.
It,
I
it
can.
floods quickly, runoffs, and then it goes maybe to the beach area or somewhere downstream somewhere. So that creates inundation along the way. It causes destruction along the way, and essentially the groundwater is not benefiting. So groundwater recharge is very important through nature-based solutions like urban agriculture, urban forestry, and stuff like that. And the last one I've talked about in the chapter, I think among the four, is the idea of green infrastructure. And I like what KMC started to do. Men on the streets, why are we putting concrete on the streets? On the streets, like, we are putting concrete along the street area. That segment of the streets from what is it? The name of this road, Mamad Manjang Highway. That
Yeah.
Mamad Manjang Highway, the concrete along could have all been removed and put in place flowers and beautiful trees and all whatnot, all the way to Tabokoto or to Brikama. This is what we need. Why do we need the concrete there? I don't get it. Because if you have those flowers and trees, they help to shock in, right? Absorb in that excess water from the streets and percolates, it infiltrates and percolates our groundwater aquifers. Then the
Absolutely.
flood risk there will minimize. But if you put concrete everywhere, what's happened? The water will run. Now it goes off the streets. Where does it go? There is no stormwater infrastructure along the sides. Or if there is one, it doesn't have the capacity to actually handle the excess water that's coming. What happens? Flooding. That's why, whether we like it or not, unless we restructure, whether we like it or not, every year Gambia will be flooded. The urban Gambia will continuously be flooded unless we rethink, redesign, and come up with nature-based solutions that help to reduce flood risk. And again, through infiltration and on other means. Of course, we need both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. We call it a hybrid solution. Nature cannot solve it all. The water that is coming into that greater Banjul area, nature-based solution wouldn't be able to help it. We need to design and come up with a stormwater infrastructure, a drainage system that's well designed enough to allow that excess water to go. Because water will always find its way. It will always find its way. And if you block it, it's going to come inside your house. There's no solution to that. You cannot stop. There's no way we can stop the water. We can only stop the water by creating the environment, the enabling environment for that water to move. Otherwise, it's coming inside your bedroom.
Okay. Thank you very much. I still have two more questions, and
That's
as well
cool.
as there is a question from the public. Salu just asked a question. Maybe I will have to read out that. While the Gambia employed a poverty reduction rate of 5.6% from 1998 to date, our poverty rate is still at the high end, tagged at 90.9%. With that statement, what link, if any, has the ecosystem had on poverty? This one is
I love
Salu.
that. I love that question. A lot of linkages, right? Because why we call it, that's why nowadays we don't call them ecosystem services, because it sounds too technical. Salu, it sounds too technical. We call them what? Nature's contribution to improving what? Human well-being. Ecosystem service, how do they help to reduce poverty reduction? Provisioning services. Food comes from nature. And this food is not just coming from the forest trees and all the forestry fruits that we're talking about, but it's also coming from agriculture. There are agroecological practices that encourage the use of nature-based practices that provides organic food instead of food that comes from GMOs or inorganic through the use of synthetic fertilizer. So if we use manure, for example, to do agriculture in the right way through agroecological practices, what we would do, we increase the food basket there, and we create employment through that. So there's somebody who is processing that manure, collecting that waste. So you are creating a mechanism for people to trade and exchange those goods amongst themselves. So we can do it through agriculture, for example. We could also do it, of course, through fisheries. Fisheries, the fish stock that comes from the sea, the ocean, the rivers, they're all nature's gift to us, right? That creates employment, it reduces poverty, it reduces hunger. right? It helps to prevent malnutrition and stuff like that. So those are some of the examples from the provision inside. But also, we can think about others. For example, nature helps with regulating air quality. For example, air quality regulation could be done through green infrastructure in urban areas. What happens these days? There's a lot of pollution. There's a lot of carbon in the air. If you have more trees and more nature there, it helps to reduce that excess carbon in the atmosphere, and that helps to improve the air quality in that space, right? So because we know that air quality issues also cause serious problems, health implications. And if you have serious health implication, that affects poverty, because why? Of course, you need to spend that excess, your disposable income that you have. You now need that money. Instead of spending that on food, you need to spend that on healthcare bills. So that's another problem right there. So that's why if you have trees that help to improve the air condition, the air quality in a given location, that help a lot with other poverty development or poverty reduction indicators. So like those are some of the examples, but we can talk about all and many other things that are related to poverty. But strong linkages, definitely. I think that's the short answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. That has to do with the GCRPS, that is this research institution, is working a lot about on evidence generation to ensure that decisions and policies are dictated by evidence. Oh, maybe what do you think this research institution or body could have done, because we did not have a lot of research institutions in the Gambia. You will count them, very few. What can this research institution do in order to contribute their path to make sure to engage the policymakers to, in order for this some of these evidences to get to policymakers, the right people, so that it can inform their decisions or policies? Yeah.
So this is a great question. There is a lot of need for a center, research and policy center like Gambia Center for Research and Policy Studies in Africa in general. So I'm part of a group of people that are also working on establishing more of an African level focus um, in bringing science and policy together, research and policy. Why is this needed? There is in most African countries that I've traveled to, and in many seminars and conferences that I've attended, people are talking about the same issue, that science is not informing policy in Africa. It's very, very limited. In the Gambia, in some countries, they have government supported or subvented institutions that are mandated to dig into the science, bring out the scientific evidence and facts, and through that process, inform policy and operationally relevant decision making in those contexts. So, what I think Gambia Center for Research and Policy Studies could do, one is to have more partnership with similar institutions like, I guess, the one that we are working on, and also other regional research institutions that are doing similar engagement and dialogue, bringing science and research or science and policy together. They could learn from them and come up with initiatives that help to enhance their objectives in the Gambia. Gambia, one way to support policymakers is for the center to conduct research and provide research and policy briefs that are sectorally relevant for various institutions in the country. And because this center says science and policy, Gambia Center for Research and Policy, it's
Yeah.
broad. It talks about almost every sector, basically every sector. It's not just climate, it's not just environment, but it's social aspects, it's the economy, it's infrastructure, all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
how about we do research and come up with policy memorandums or policy briefs that help to engage the right and the relevant government stakeholders to take action. There must be a policy dialogue. And again, maybe I encourage them to organize a workshop or a conference with
Yeah.
stakeholders
Mhm.
where we bring out the importance of connecting science to policy in the Gambia. And as you rightly said, not many institutions are doing that. I think the University of the Gambia could be one of those to contribute a lot, but the University of the Gambia is focused more on teaching. It's
Yeah.
not on the engagement and the dialogue with government. It's like, let's get the curriculum and the curricular right, and let's get the knowledge out there. So, but that's why centers like this are critical and they are important. So I am interested in any partnership, any ideation around this topic moving forward and see how best we can engage government. Um, and then, yeah, I think that would be great. I'll be in the Gambia next week. So
Okay.
I'm happy to follow up and have some discussions if need be. But yeah.
Thank you very much. One, and related to your chapter 4, do you have any plans to implement this the project for the chapter 4? Do you have any plans to make sure that that project is being implemented in the Gambia?
No, the nice thing was that after the study, the project is under implementation. The project was implemented.
Oh, it
So
was.
yeah, if you go to Senegambia, you see what happened there. So they implemented the project. The nice thing connected to our research is to say that this is a project that you could justify warrants the use of public funds. The
Okay.
public the public feels like this is a good project.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nfamara Dampha, and I congratulate you on your substantial and meaningful work on a truly significant topic, this on ecosystem. I am pleased with the dedication and effort um, evident within this your dissertation. I couldn't read all, but at least the little I was able to read really bring out some very critical evidence that can really be used to inform policies, to inform our programs. Yeah, and that being said, we will have to wrap up here, and I will maybe if you have any closing remark to say, you are welcome.
I want to thank the center again for organizing these webinars, and I want to thank all the audience for their time to listen to this long. I don't know. I hope it's meaningful discussion, um, and then I encourage all of us to think about the connection between research and policy and operations because you know gone should be days when we just make decisions without reflecting on scientific findings or evidence around the
Yeah,
issues that we are dealing with. So the complexity of the challenges we have today are so complex and interconnected that it's a stakeholder driven process, but it's also a scientific driven process where science informs operations and policies and regulations. So thank you very much, Ismail Jajasi, for going through those long pages of dissertation work and coming up with these great questions. I'm very much impressed. Thank you very much. Yeah.
yes. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Yeah.